Thank you, Dr. Monaka. It's good to be here with you all, and um, uh, excited to and be engaged with some fun guidance on how we can keep our cognition as healthy as possible long into the future. So, um, the title of my talk is Remembering Your Why, the Synergy of Salutogenic Science. And a lot of people don't know what salutogenic means. So I'll start with a toast to you all. I would toast you, and I generally would say salute to your health. And my intention is for you to be resilient and healthy for many, many years. We don't focus as much on that in medical training. We generally focus on pathos, disease, and suffering. If I wanted your best outcome, I wouldn't say pathos to your disease and suffering. We get what we give, and that to which we give attention grows. So we want health to grow. And so we need a better balance between reactive care, which is wait for the disease to occur and then try to fix it, versus proactive care, which is more salutogenic science. So we're trying to bring this intention into healthcare delivery and healthcare education. These are some of my disclosures. I do a lot of medical editing. I'm the medical editor for Integrative Medicine now. We just signed the contract for the sixth edition, and the next edition of the textbook of family medicine will be published in the spring. And I just gave up being co-editor of Current Therapy. It was just too much. I also wrote a book called The Compassionate Connection. 100% of these proceeds goes towards medical education. So let's explore this. We always want the silver bullet, right, in everything we do. It's so nice if we have a condition and we can just give it one thing. That is impossible with cognitive decline. And what we really want, and what I love to do, is what we like to call ourselves super generalists in primary care, where we look at the biopsychosocial spiritual influence of every human being. And that requires a different tool, such as silver buckshot. How do we look at multiple areas of health and resiliency and optimize that so we can prolong the body's health span? A pathogenic model generally uses a lot of drugs, and drugs are my most useful treatment, so I don't want to downplay them. But generally, when that becomes our main hammer, we use it a lot. And this is growing in our use, particularly in America. In uh, this last or 2024, it's been estimated that 65% of those over age 65 are on five drugs or more. Five drugs or more is the definition of polypharmacy. Now, that's not a bad thing, no judgment here. A lot of people need five drugs or more, but Sir William Osler said it's a physician's duty to educate the masses not to take medicine. Health is much more about what we do than what we take. And this is a big part of our conversation today. Maintaining cognitive function is more about healthy behaviors than taking a pill. Both are important, but generally we start with the pill before we spend time and investment in the healthy behavior. The NHANES study showed that 18.5% of patients taking medication for high blood pressure were on medicines that cause high blood pressure. And we see that with cognitive decline. This study assessed anticholinergic burden. And this is a significant pet peeve of mine, and it happens all the time when I'm staffing our residents, is that we put someone on Aricept for cognitive decline, and we have them on an anti-spasmodic that can reduce acetylcholine. So we give drugs to raise acetylcholine while we have people on drugs that reduce acetylcholine. And so we should always start with removing those drugs that can cause cognitive decline before we put them on drugs that increase acetylcholine and memory. A 54% increased risk of dementia in those with the highest anticholinergic burden is what this study showed. So this is a risk of polypharmacy, and we generally want to move more upstream and be more proactive. There have been a lot of studies now showing how lifestyle can influence longevity. This one was published in Circulation and mainly looked at death from heart attacks. And they used the lifestyle 7, and you can see what all of those lifestyle factors were. And those who did all of these things versus those who didn't lived 20 years longer. And the reason I drew this drawing with a lever is that how are we going to get people to do these things? And the sad thing of this study is only 3% of this cohort actually did all of these things or had these things under control. So, but look at the potential of that life on the epigenome of your genetic risks. So we're looking at nurture and nature. Nature is what we have in our genes. Nurture is the environment we create, the exposome, if you will, or the epigenetic soup that our genes live in. So even if we have a BRCA gene for breast cancer or the alleles that increase our risk for Alzheimer's disease, we can keep those from expressing themselves through our lifestyle choices. And that epigenetic influence is really a strong factor. Now, this lifestyle 7 is lifestyle 9. They've added sleep as well as depression and mood into that, and the effects are even greater now. So this is our strongest medicine. How do we activate it? Part of the challenge is how things are financed here in American medicine. And when we have a reactive model, it's very expensive and ineffective. I don't know if anybody's been to Andorra. That had the highest value of any healthcare delivery country in the world. And I looked up Andorra. It's a little country between France and Spain. They have one jail, they have strong social support, and they all eat a Mediterranean diet. And look at the health outcomes versus look at America. We spend $5 trillion on a healthcare system that doesn't produce health. It's probably the worst investment in the history of humans. We need to do healthcare delivery, and we need to invest in more salutogenic outcomes. And that has to coordinate with policymakers outside of healthcare. It has to be a team sport. This is the financial model that I think is really important for us to really create a salutogenic science and a better balance between salutogenesis and pathogenesis. If we are just working within a capitated 100% RVU system, we actually do better if our patients are sicker. That's not what we want for our communities. We want our communities to be healthier. So that's the next triangle, the value margin. And actually, that value capitated margin is most successful if we can encourage patients to do this for themselves, where they don't even enter the medical establishment. How do we engage people to do the healthier things? How do we work with our local farmers to get people healthy produce in an affordable way so we don't have to ship in a blueberry from Peru? You know, that's the big picture strategy that we need to do for each other. And we need to have salutogenics be profitable so we can sustain that because the current healthcare system is not sustainable. It's the number one cause of bankruptcy across the nation. So let's talk about expanding our health span. That's our goal. We want a long health span and a short disease burden. And so we live a healthy life, an engaged life, and then we slide into home plate head first and die. We're all going to do it. We're all going to die, but we want to have that disease burden be as short as possible. Probably the best example of this in recent history was Queen Elizabeth. This is a picture taken of Queen Elizabeth 2 days before she died. And this is a beautiful example of a prolonged health span. And so how did she do it? Well, uh, she was treated like a queen, right? She had people make her healthy food, and she didn't have to do hard labor. You know, she probably got a good night's sleep. And if you look at queen bees, now I'm talking about the bee that stings people, there is no genetic difference between the queen bee and the rest of the hive. The only difference is that queen bee is given the royal jelly, the ideal food from the rest of the hive. The rest of the hive treats that queen bee like a queen. There's no genetic difference. It's all an epigenetic influence. So how do we do this for all human beings? How do we create health equity so everybody has the right to live a long, healthy life, just like Queen Elizabeth? I think that's our salutogenic goal. That's our salutogenic focus. And if you look at the genetics versus lifestyle, it's interesting how much lifestyle and genetic play a role here. And what the research shows is that if we can get to 65 without a lot of chronic diseases, there's a really good chance we can get to 100. And then after 100, it's mainly genetics. Getting from 100 to 120 is usually genetics. We're thinking that 120 might, who knows, but that might be kind of the human's maximum. Who knows? I'll probably be proven wrong 20 years from now. But what predicts our ability to get to 100 is stability. And how do we maintain stability so we don't fall? So if we can get to 65 and be healthy and then maintain our stability and our movement, we're more likely to get to 100. And then if we have good genes, maybe we'll get to 120. But the whole goal is a fulfilling, healthy, long health span. So this is the curve I use to stress the importance because so often in healthcare, we focus on the left side of this curve, people who do worse than expected or people with chronic multiple diseases, when we should be focusing on the right side of the bell-shaped curve, those people who do better than expected, and research them, and then understand how we can learn from them and reproduce that. So we move the whole population to the right and we create a new median. And then we continue to research those who do better and better and have optimal cognitive function until that year, whatever, and then they die. So this is a slide I like to show of salutogenic science and the difference between the two. And it's not a either or, it's a yes and. It's just weighted in an unbalanced way. So pathogenic science is reactive. It's mainly disease focused. Salutogenic science is proactive. In pathogenesis, our patients are a passive recipient. They just lie there and we give them things. But in salutogenic science, they're the active partner. Think about how much time a patient spends with their doctor a year. I might spend 20 minutes 3 times a year, even with my patients with diabetes sometimes, but they live with themselves. They choose what to eat 100% of the time. Pathogenesis focuses on weaknesses. Salutagenesis focuses on strengths, what's right with you instead of what's wrong with you. Pathogenesis is very expensive. Salutagenesis is high value. Pathogenesis is reductionistic and focuses on parts, and salutagenesis looks at the whole picture, that biopsychosocial, spiritual balance of nutrients that helps the tree bloom and grow. So this is what we need more of, and what I hope to talk to you about today. And many would say pathogenesis is looking in the rearview mirror, and the salutagenesis is looking into the future, but really it includes much more than the biological system. There's social determinants of health. There's how do we engage humans in meaningful behaviors, and where it is the meaning. Why do they want to be healthy? What do they want their health for? And those are some deeper questions we'll end with today. How does that influence what we eat and how much we exercise and how much we love and support one another? And then that results in our optimal potential. So we need to work more towards the right of this curve so we have less demand towards the left. This figure is a depiction of what happens when you place one social media post, one Facebook post or Instagram post. All these computers talk together to give you information, to analyze you, and then to try generally to sell you stuff and to tell you what you already know, because that's what attracts us, right? So this is dangerous because it really narrows our cognitive abilities. But look at our potential to take all this information and understand the complexity of what it means to be human so we can find a salutogenic pattern that's unique to each individual. Every human being, even with cognitive decline, may have a different path towards their best salutogenic outcome. The pathogenic model is mainly A to B. You've got this condition, okay, take this pill. But the salutogenic model requires that we look at the unique context of who that person is with the disease rather than just what disease the person has. All right, let's talk a little bit into some of these lifestyles. This study was published just recently, and what they showed was those people who had at least 4% of vigorous exercise, and they measured this through an accelerometer. So the way they determined vigorous exercise was more gravity resistance with that accelerometer. And the requirement or the inclusion criteria was just 4% of vigorous exercise. So if you walked for 100 minutes, you ran rather quickly for 4 minutes. And that's all you needed to be classified within the vigorous exercise category. And if you look at dementia and type 2 diabetes, 63 and 60% reduction. I don't think we have a medicine this good. That if we can keep the body and the brain moving and learning and exercising and adapting, it's a really healthy process for us. And I'm not going to talk a lot about weight. I am going to talk about diet, but midlife assessment of hip to waist ratio, as well as improvement in diet enhances cognitive brain connectivity, white matter integrity, and function throughout the brain. And this has been reproduced in a number of different studies. But let's look at nutrition here. This is the three-city Bordeaux study in France. And they followed people, I think it was 15 to 20 years, about 2,000 individuals, and they used network science to put into a computer the foods that they ate and their risk of cognitive decline. And there were some things that popped out here. One was red meat and alcohol. Those were two significant risk factors, as well as sugar and bread. You know, most things made from bleached white flour is more or less sugar. And if you want to see how much fiber is in bread, you scrunch it in your fist. And if it's a softball, there's a lot of fiber. If it's a little pea, it's cotton candy. And that amount of fiber really makes a difference because that slows the absorption of the glucose into the bloodstream, and that lowers the glycemic index. So that's a really important predictor of how much sugar that bread has. So the main risk factors were alcohol, red and processed red meat, sugar, and bread. And bread was a big source of that carbohydrate and that sugar. 2 teaspoons of olive oil each day. This is a monosaturated fat that has also been found to reduce dementia risk. Olive oil and monosaturated fats have been found to help maintain the blood-brain barrier and increase the integrity. One of the worst things we can do is lose the integrity of our blood-brain barrier because then we create a more pro-inflammatory state of the brain, which can increase the risk of dementia, stroke, as well as neurocognitive decline. This was in the nurses and health study and the health professional study here in America, followed for 28 years, and there was a 28% reduction in dementia death in those who had, on average, greater than 2 teaspoons of olive oil a day. So on your high foliage salad, enjoy a olive oil based dressing is a really healthy thing for the brain. And we like to say a handful of nuts, not a canful. Why not a canful? Because these are rich in calories. You know, they grow trees, so they're really dense in nutrients, but also dense in calories. But a handful has, the PrediMed study showed a 20% all-cause reduction in mortality with just a handful of nuts a day. So this is in my lunch every single day, and you grow to love them. I try and get the non-salted ones, so be careful with the salt. That might raise your blood pressure, so be careful with that. And then Processed foods. A lot of these studies I'm sharing with you come from the UK Biobank study. The UK Biobank study was one of the is one of the largest prospective studies with the largest number of MRIs on the planet ever completed, and it's ongoing. So this UK Biobank study has provided us with tremendous insight into the importance of nutrition and lifestyle factors in maintaining our cognition. Uh, One of the key points of this study was that if we replaced ultra-processed food with whole foods, uh, it reduces the risk of cognitive decline or is associated. Remember, all these nutrition studies, there's associations. It's not a cause associated with potential reduction of cognitive decline by 34%. So what's the definition of an ultra-processed food? Generally, a processed food is something you can't make in your kitchen with whole foods. Usually it has a lot of ingredients and it's not something that's easily reproducible. All right. I used to have all the citations on this slide and I couldn't fit the graphic anymore. So I took all the citations off and I can't tell you how much evidence there is for this slide. And probably the healthiest diet on the planet is a pesco-vegetarian diet, roots and fins. If we can get most of our protein from things like beans and nuts, and then get the beneficial omega-3 fatty acids through fins, uh, the pesco-vegetarian is probably the healthiest on the diet on the planet. Then two legs, poultry's kind of in the middle. And remember, most poultry pushes all their fat to the skin. So if you take the skin off and just eat the lean meat, that's a little bit better. Four legs, red meat is farther to the right, and the worst is packaged meat. Why is packaged meat so bad? Well, it's how it's processed and treated. Salami, hot dogs, those things are treated with nitrates. Nitrates dilate the blood vessels, right? And it maintains some of the hemoglobin in the meat so it doesn't look like your cadaver from your health-related school, right? It becomes very pale if it's not treated with nitrates. But nitrates are healthy, right? They dilate our blood vessel, but not these. These are nitrous amines. Nitrous amines are oncogenic. And this is why we see a significant higher risk of particularly colon cancer with a high consumption of packaged processed red meats. So really try and limit those. You may have seen a recent study showing that red meat might subdue the ApoE4 risk gene expression. That may be true. I'm a little skeptical because if you eat a lot of red meat, it's very rich in saturated fats. Saturated fats are what are released from the cell membrane to create arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is the main precursor of inflammation in the body. So that's why red meat, sugar, and excessive dairy are the three most inflammatory food groups because of that increased amount of arachidonic acid. The main drug we use to keep arachidonic acid from escaping the cell membrane is steroids. So that's how steroids work. They keep the inflammatory arachidonic acid from escaping the cell membrane. And so if we want to reduce inflammation, let's reduce the foods that are richest in the arachidonic acid that start the cascade of inflammation in the body. And that's usually roots and fins. Roots and fins are the least inflammatory over time. All right. Also from the UK Biobank, they wanted to look at gray matter shrinkage with the amount of alcohol. And what was the tipping point here was 2 units, and they defined a pint of beer, which is 60 ounces, about 15 grams of alcohol, which would equal almost 2 units. So if this was done in the UK, so people can go and have a pint of beer with their friends, but no more. And having anything with friends is protective for the brain, so that's a healthy, good thing. But over a pint of beer or two regular alcohol drinks is the tipping point, according to the UK Biobank study, in increasing the amount of gray matter shrinkage, which is something we don't want. I made a similar slide for the healthiest drinks versus the least healthy. We're the only mammal that drinks milk after being weaned from our mothers. Every other mammal on this planet just drinks water. Water by far is the healthiest thing. Try not drinking out of plastic things. And good, clean, filtered water is key. Tea has polyphenols, which are really good for your endothelium, but just be careful with all the artificial sweeteners. Coffee also is very healthy, particularly for the gallbladder and the liver. And then again, be careful with what you put in the coffee. Then we go into sodas and juices. We'll talk about that. And then we've already talked about alcohol. So none of these things are, I would say, are good and bad, but the amount is the key. All right. Through our lifespan, we have tried to manipulate nature through our biochemistry. And if you look through the history of manipulating nutrition through our biochemistry, we've pretty much failed every single time. Let's talk about high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup is a main predictor of pediatric obesity because it doesn't stimulate satiety. It never makes kids full. But it's a big source of sugar, which leads to weight gain. How about partially hydrogenated trans fatty acids? We made those in the laboratory to try and keep polyunsaturated fats that we thought were healthier than saturated fats on the shelf longer. And now we've seen a tremendous increased risk of cardiovascular death with the increased consumption of trans fatty acids. That one failed miserably. We tried to cure hunger by cross-hybridizing wheat, by creating a shorter stalk with more grain so we could harvest the wheat twice a year. So in that cross-hybridization of the wheat, we created new gluten proteins that now we're seeing a higher incidence of non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So every time we've tried to manipulate nature, we've failed. I believe the next example of that is non-nutritive sweeteners. These non-nutritive sweeteners we're learning are not as healthy as just zero-calorie water. They have 0 calories, and we're learning from the science of this that the calorie hypothesis is not all there is. It's much more than calories because these non-nutritive sweeteners stimulate the sweetness receptors in cells. And when that sweetness receptor is stimulated, the body makes insulin. And when the body makes insulin without eating, it creates insulin resistance. And we know that people who drink a lot of these non-nutritive sweetened drinks, their risk of type 2 diabetes is greater than 50% versus those who do not eat or drink a lot of those non-nutritive sweeteners. Now, if you look at all processed foods, if it says no sugar, you know it has these sweeteners in it. And what we're learning, at least this study published in Stroke in 2017, looked at those who drank sodas, like a Diet Coke type of soda, that was very rich in aspartame. The challenge with aspartame is it gets metabolized into formaldehyde. Formaldehyde increases destruction of the blood-brain barrier, and we don't want that leaky brain, if you will. And this study associated those with higher intake of those non-nutritive sweetened sodas with a higher risk of dementia as well as stroke. So just drink water or have some tea. This blood-brain barrier is such a dynamic, important part of our body to keep intact. You know, these microglial cells, this is off the topic, but we have found that low dose naltrexone that we give for people with hypersensitivity, like long COVID or fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue, low dose naltrexone reduces the number of these microglial cells, which are kind of yelling at the central nervous system to be more sensitive. And so how we manipulate and preserve this blood-brain barrier is really, really important. And we can mainly do that through these lifestyle and nutritional interventions. The New York Times just had an article recently about the third communication aspect of the body. There's blood, lymphatics, and now there's the interstitium. And what the research has shown is that blood or ink from tattoos is now found throughout the body. That that ink is a marker that's found throughout the fascial layers and the interstitium, and now we're starting to see these microplastics in the brain. And remember, these are perceived as a foreign body, which they are. So the body mounts an immune response, which then further deteriorates that blood-brain barrier, which increases the chronic inflammation of the brain. So we really need to be careful to try and avoid these microplastics, which are universal in our environment. So this is why we need policy change and protections for public health. All right, let's talk about methylation. Methylation is really important for things to get across the blood-brain barrier. And when we methylate something, we attach a carbon and three hydrogens. And in order for nutrients to get across the blood-brain barrier, it requires methylation. Methylation is also what happens in the epigenome when genes are turned on or turned off. That's also a methylating process. So having a strong, robust methylation process in the human body is a really healthy thing. So how do we test for that? Homocysteine. Homocysteine pretty much failed as a cardiovascular risk marker, but it's still a really good one for cognitive risk because homocysteine gets converted into methionine if there is a good, healthy process for protein development. When homocysteine is high and methionine is low, that means that process is dysfunctional. So if someone's homocysteine level is greater than 13, they have 2 times the risk of cognitive decline. This is a very cheap test to order. If someone comes in, they say, I'm worried about Alzheimer's and my mom or someone had it, I will always order a homocysteine level. I think this costs 24 bucks. And it's a big motivator for people to eat better because one of the key ingredients of methylation are foods found in the Mediterranean diet. Folate or foliage. Foliage is green things. Any green thing you consume is going to have folic acid in it. Nuts, fish, berries, beans, and olive oil are all rich in folate, B6, and B12. So if someone's homocysteine is high, I generally will supplement with folate, B12, and B6, and then I'll follow homocysteine in hopes that it goes low. The main genetic risk is the MTHFR genetic mutation. A lot of people will screen for this. I don't. It's expensive, and it's not going to change my management. I still want to do all I can to get homocysteine low. So I use these very cheap interventions to try and reduce that risk by lowering homocysteine and increasing that protein production so it gets across the blood-brain barrier. So B6, B12. Remember, these are really safe vitamins to take, except for B6. B6, this might be on your boards one day. B6 is the one B vitamin that is neurotoxic in really high levels. That's usually more than 250 milligrams a day. And generally, we're recommending 50 milligrams a day of B6. And B12 is very safe. These are the B vitamins are what turn your urine bright yellow. If your body doesn't need them, you can actually dose B vitamins by how yellow your urine is. If the yellow goes away, then you need more B vitamins. This is important for cognitive, but also mood. And for patients with severe depression, I'll also check homocysteine to make sure that's not elevated. And if you look at the research for mood, adding folic acid or folate to an SSRI enhances the effect of that drug. And in part, that's because we need to methylate folate to get it across the blood-brain barrier to make dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and acetylcholine. These are really important hormones for cognitive function. SAMe, acetyl-methionine, is used a lot in Europe, and it's actually a quite well-studied supplement for anxiety and depression. It's photosensitive, so you have to keep it in a brown bottle or it will go bad. But again, B6, B12, and methylfolate. So you have to get the methylated folate if people have the MTHFR genetic dysfunction. Most people don't have this, right? But some people do, and you don't want to miss those. And if they do have a high homocysteine, I'll put them on 5 to 15 milligrams of methylfolate, and this is over the counter. Methylfolate is more expensive than folate, so just be aware of that. All right, let's talk about calorie restriction. These are two 27-year-old rhesus monkeys, the exact same age. The one on the left was fed the standard Western type diet, and the one on the right was treated with calorie restriction. So, calorie restriction, the oldest therapeutic modality on the planet is fasting. And it really seems to be quite helpful for the central nervous system. When we have time restricted eating, it releases the brain derived neurotrophic factor. There's a number of different ways to do this. I usually stick to the TRE, the time released or time restricted eating. And the easiest is 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. So it has to be at least 12 hours to get a benefit. The ideal is 16 hours. So if they can do 16 hours, they're going to get more of a benefit. You can also do a 5-2 diet where you fast 2 days out of you eat regularly 5 days and fast 2 days out of the week. And then there's alternate day fasting, which I think is just human torture. So I would rather just do the 12 hours or 16 hours. For me personally, I do the 12 hours, and the 7 p.m. is the cutoff. And that also is beneficial because you're not eating right before bedtime. If we eat right before bedtime, it goes all to storage and goes all to fat. And so you don't want to eat or drink calories right before bedtime. So I try and stick with that 12 hours, but if you really want to get the maximum benefit, the 16 hours a day is fasting will stimulate that BDNF the most. All right, I bet you've had other people talk about blood pressure, so I'll talk about this pretty quickly. These are 5 cohort studies over 28,000 patients showing a significant reduction in dementia, risk of cognitive decline when we control people's blood pressure. And there have been so many different studies talking about what's the ideal blood pressure. This is the one I always think of when I have my patients try and have a goal for their blood pressure is 140/80, because it's mainly focused on this meta-analysis of cognitive function. Once that systolic blood pressure goes above 140, that risk goes way up. And then if we can get it below 80, the diastolic, the risk goes way down. So that seems to be the tipping point for cognitive function over time. And obviously that would also improve the health of the heart. So let's talk about foods. We talked about nitrates. Any plant we eat that comes from the ground is going to be rich in nitrates. So this is a study of beetroot juice for blood pressure, and it will lower blood pressure. Guess who sponsored this study? Heartbeat, a company that makes beetroot juice. So always look and see who sponsors the research. This worked. It was rich in nitrates, and any garlic or beets or I'd be careful with potatoes because they're very starchy, but most things grown in the ground are going to be very high in nitrates. So root vegetables are probably the most important food that will lower your blood pressure. And if we look at the DASH diet, a low sodium DASH diet, which is very similar to the MIND diet. So the MIND diet, the Mediterranean diet, the DASH diet are all very similar. They're low salt, plant forward nutrition. Look at the effect, 20 points on systolic blood pressure and almost 8 points for diastolic blood pressure. When we compare that to other the most powerful drug I use to lower people's blood pressure is generally amlodipine, a calcium channel blocker. Spironolactone is another really powerful one. But look at the low sodium DASH diet compared to the calcium channel blocker. It beat it significantly. So when we're trying to reduce the number of drugs people are on, they could get off a lot of their blood pressure medicines, which is my favorite thing to do in practice of medicine is take people off drugs because they don't need them anymore. So how do we do that? The low sodium DASH diet had a significant effect. All right, let's talk about what happens when we eat the beet or the garlic or the carrot. That nitrate-rich food as a vegetable, I start to chew it up, and it starts out as nitrate, And then the bacteria in my saliva and my gut, they transition that nitrate to nitrite, two oxygens instead of three. And then in the endothelium, there are two enzymes, DDAH and ADMA, that convert nitrites to nitric oxide. And then nitric oxide lowers my blood pressure, reduces my arterial stiffness, and improves my endothelial function. If there's any part of our body we want to keep healthy, it's the lining of our blood vessels. It's our endothelium. But there's a drug that interferes with this, and that drug is PPIs. Chronic use of PPIs have a significant negative effect on overall health for humans. Not only might they reduce the beneficial effects from eating vegetables by reducing these enzymes, they may also increase the atherosclerotic risk of our endothelium over time. This is a study published in PLOS One looking at the length of PPI use, proton pump inhibitors, completely shut off the acid pump versus a control. And those most likely to die of myocardial infarction, that risk was much greater the longer someone was on a PPI. So this probably has a cumulative effect. We think one of the hypotheses is in regards to the risk of chronic PPI use is that the macrophages, the chimney sweeps of our endothelium, the cells that maintain the cleanliness and the smoothness and the function of the lining of our blood vessels, uh, uh, their optimal function is ideal mainly by their use of lysosomes. So the lysosome is an organelle within the macrophage that uses a proton pump to lyse bad stuff. So it works by creating an acidic environment to clean the lining of our blood vessels. When we shut off the proton pump, we also shut off the chimney sweep of our blood vessels. We inactivate the effectiveness of the macrophage to keep our endothelium clean. And this is one hypothesis how or why chronic long-term use of PPIs may actually increase the risk of heart disease as well as kidney disease. And there's also now correlations with cognitive decline. So many people are on these drugs and they don't need them. And the challenge is when you take them off, they'll have rebound hyperacidity and they think they need them the rest of their life. So you really have to tell them you're going to have worsening acid reflux. Even if they never had reflux at the beginning of taking these drugs, they'll have it if you take them off because they'll get rebound hyperacidity. So I tell them it's going to take 2 weeks for your body to adapt. Use some Carafate or some other coder to help transition. And then if they still have reflux disease a month later, then you do the upper endoscopy and you see what's going on in their stomach. Most people can get off of these if we give it a chance. Uh, this will be on your boards. What's the main nutritional deficiency of PPIs and metformin is B12, and B12 is needed for cognitive function. So metformin and PPIs double the risk of B12 deficiency, and that's a really important thing. All my patients, and actually, if you look at the package insert for metformin, it says check B12 levels every 3 years while your patient is on that. So B vitamins are really important for cognition. We give a lot of drugs that deplete B12 levels. So those are two really common ones is metformin and PPIs. All right, this is a rat study, one of my favorite studies ever done. Uh, Not very nice because they had to kill the rat, but here's what they did. They had a rat pup, and they took one set of rat pups and removed them from their mother, and they took the other set of rat pups and the mom licked and groomed them. So they looked at the rat pups that were licked and groomed versus those who were separated from their mother, and then looked at the dendritic growth of their brain. And if you can see on the right side of that graphic is the high licked and groomed rat pups, and those on the left were the low lick and groomed rat pups. So this isn't meant to encourage you to go and lick and groom your patients, but it's important for us to have that social love and connection. Every human being needs that, and that's what stimulates brain growth and connections and optimal function. So that social connection is so important to what we do for one another. If you look at SSRIs and SNRIs, but mainly, remember, SNRIs raise blood pressure, so we have to be careful. Duloxetine, venlafaxine, those raise blood pressure. SSRIs also inhibit platelet function. So every platelet has a serotonin receptor on it. And if you look particularly in elderly patients who are on SSRIs, it increases their risk of microvascular bleeds. So I shared this study because mindfulness meditation has the same effects as escitalopram without the side effects. And how can we use some of these non-pharmaceutical strategies to train, we have many of the drugs we need right here that we can make ourselves if we just were given a chance to do that. So we work mindfulness training into a lot of our primary care offerings. And we do this before putting them on the drug. And a lot of people need the drugs, and we'll do that if the mindfulness training doesn't work. But look at the research showing and look at the cost and the potential side effects and what's empowering the human to do this for themselves versus being a passive recipient of an external influence. So we like this. It's a salutogenic approach. How do we stimulate self-healing within this complex human body so we need less things? And that is an art that we love to be a part of. So I'm going to end with that. In 2013, we were asked to come and be part of the VA of changing the conversation from what's wrong with you to what's right with you. And we went to over 50 VA systems throughout the country, and we worked with clinicians to explore their why. Why do you want to do this work with patients? Why do you want to do this work for yourself? And we asked the clinicians, what do you want your health for? And we went a little bit deeper. Many say healthcare in America is a mile wide and an inch deep. In order to do salutogenic science, we got to go deeper. We have to go into the why, into what motivates people to want to change for themselves. And I love to use this metaphor. It was a story. Tracy Gaudet started this program in the VA, and she told a story of a 49-year-old woman who had type 2 diabetes, and she always felt bad going to the doctor because they always told her she needed to lose weight or she wasn't eating well, and she felt somewhat broken. And the next time she went to the doctor, she said, I don't care about these hemoglobin A1C and my LDL cholesterol. I want you to help me climb to Mount Kilimanjaro on my 50th birthday. And the doctor said, that's not how I'm being judged. I'm being judged by how well I control your A1C. But he was willing. He said, okay, I will help you get to your health goal. Get to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro by your 50th birthday. And they said, okay, what do we need to do? Well, I need to get in shape. So there was an exercise physiologist that she was referred to. And she said, I don't think I have the confidence to do it. So there was a health psychologist, part of the health-oriented team. And then the doctor said, okay, we need to get your diabetes under control. And so they worked on that. Long story short, on her 50th birthday, she got to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, and everybody cheered, right? She cheered. The health team cheered because they helped her get to her health goal. And guess what happened to her A1C as a side effect, right? This is the perfect story. It doesn't always happen this way, but look at how we shift to what matters to the human being we're serving. If we can take our glasses off and put theirs on and then use ours in service of their health goals, think how much more fun that is. Think how much more engaging that is. And I love this definition uh, uh, of hell as a place where nothing connects with nothing. How do we connect their lives to their health goals? So this is something they want to do for themselves. And that's so much more fun to practice medicine that way. So this is the mandala that we use. We start with the individual. We taught mindfulness training. So why do you want to be healthy? Everybody knows themselves the best. So we ask, out of these 8 core ingredients that every human being needs to be healthy, where do you want to start? We ask them, where do you want to start? And then when they tell us that, we then recruit the ideal professional to help them achieve it. So we start with the individual. We ask them where they need the most self-care. We then recruit the professional, and we create the team of the community that results in the whole health outcome for what the goal we want to achieve. So this whole health process has now been supported by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine as a new way to provide care, which is really about community engagement. How do we engage? First, ask the community and the individual what they want, and then we use our expertise in service. This is a study showing high purpose versus low purpose after age 50. Those with low purpose were 2.5 times more likely to die prematurely than those with high purpose. So this why, remembering our why we want to be healthier, forgive easily, eat more plants and fins, that's a predictor. It also influences pharmaceutical costs. We followed pharmaceutical costs. Those who were engaged in the whole health process in the VA had a significant reduction in pharmaceutical costs versus those who did not. Opioid prescribing went way down in those involved in the whole health process. We also retained clinicians within the VA. Their engagement in their job, their enjoyment in their job went way up. This is all paid by your tax dollar. So go and use these tools. This is the personal health inventory, and you can use this 2-pager in your practice. We use it with all of our annual physicals in our clinic, and we're really trying to shift from that reactive model to the more proactive one. And we worked with Epic to have the patient's health goal float to the top of the problem list. And, our patients now can see their problem list and they see themselves as broke. I've got hemorrhoids, depression, high blood pressure, and a hangnail, right? Oh, I'm a mess. But hey, what if we put what their health goal was at the top of that problem list? Now everybody in the health system sees what their goal is. The social worker, the nurse in the emergency room, the cardiologist, the psychologist, everybody can see what's important to that human being. And we start to proactively work towards their best outcome based on what they tell us, not what we project onto them. And that's an important balance. So let's put it all together. Try and eat more roots and fins. It's okay to have a steak now and then, but make it now and then, right? Pretty rare. Try and avoid consuming humans' manipulation of nutrition and nature in excess. Try and keep that blood pressure below 140 over 80. Try and avoid any unnecessary pharmaceuticals that may not be needed. And move your body. I like to say tie loose knots so your mind is changeable and malleable. One of my favorite studies looked at people who recovered from diseases they never should have recovered from, like metastatic ovarian cancer. This author interviewed a lot of these people who did better than they should have. And the author thought they might all be on vitamin C or something, but they weren't. But they all had 3 characteristics that helped them heal when they weren't expected to. One was they were a little stubborn. They didn't take no for an answer. The next one was that even though they were stubborn, they were malleable. They rolled with the punches. They changed with their environment. And then number 3, as you might predict, they were surrounded by love and social support. So how do we look at the human being and empower them and help them believe that they can be healthier? I think that is important. How do we get out of the mind's clutter, focus on one thing well, particularly with social media? We're seeing all sorts of risks from that clutter of not connecting human to human. One of my favorite quotes, sorry, I can't remember his name, but he said that the main discovery of the 21st century won't come from AI or technology. It will come from that intervention stimulating us to define humanism in a deeper way. So all this technology is going to require us to be more human together. And people are going to start to crave it. They're going to start to crave that human connection unless we raise kids through screens instead of humans. And that's part of that neuroplasticity that we really need to develop. What's your why? What's going to motivate that healthier behavior? And how do we start asking those questions in the delivery of healthcare? And so it's so much more fun to see what's right with people instead of what's wrong with them. And it just shifts the whole energy. And I would say it just amazes me every time I go to a movie or I see something non-physical, right? I see something, it's not physical, but it goes into this computer called my mind. I metabolize it and out shoots a neuropeptide. So something non-physical becomes physical by my interpretation. So my interpretation can create a healthy neuropeptide or a one that stimulates a stress response. How you see it makes it physical matter. And and this is quantum mechanics, right? I love quantum mechanics because I can never figure it out. And in the end, I figure out, oh, I'm just going to be happy. And that's quantum mechanics, right? You're taking that potential waveform and you're collapsing it into a particle based on how you interpret it. How you see it makes it matter. So we can look at our patients as potentially broke. Like if you're going to raise a child and you wanted to do a really bad job, you would say you're not going to amount to everything because you collapse that potential into despair. You create a negative neuropeptide. But if we shift to a salutogenic process and we see people as potentially healthy and we collapse them into hope, then that neuropeptide stimulates our immune system and stimulates the optimal production of this milieu of potential, which is dramatic. So I'll end with one of my favorite humans, Jeanne Calment. She's the oldest documented living human being. She died at 122, and she attributed her longevity to always wearing a smile. But she also had a good sense of humor. And at 121, she was interviewed, and she said, "I have only one wrinkle, and I'm sitting on it." So I want to be like her as I grow older.